Go. Good morning and welcome to our special edition of Facebook Live. Here, really thinking of it as our Good Friday edition. I will introduce you to our fabulous Docent Tom in a moment. But first I wanted to say the Umloff is for all people. We are a secular institution meant for the entire community. It is also true that we have a number of religious sculptures in the garden because Charles Umloff was doing a lot of commissions for churches and for private people. And the story of the Crucifixion that you'll hear today is particularly fascinating. And we thought that today, because Friday is Good Friday, we would talk about the Crucifixion. And whether you are faithful or not, there is a powerful human element to this story and to the scene of Christ hanging from the cross. And we would leave Tom to talk about it and also to bring in a little bit of the story about Charles doing this commission and how it was in fact not selected at first, shall we say. And I wanted to also, before we introduce Tom, just show you some reproductions, photocopies of some of Umloff's drawings of the Crucifixion, so you could see what a spectacular and beautiful draftsman he was, and how often, and this has been pointed out by a couple of people, Umloff really thought volumetrically, much more like a sculptor, and you'll see that in here. He's thinking of the general layout. He's thinking of lights and darks because he's thinking in 3 dimensions. And here, just notice this. This will relate to something Tom's going to say. Here is a crucifixion, probably with one of the thieves next to him, but look at how the head is hanging down and how the arms are up in what we consider a little bit more traditional. Here's another scene, head of Christ, with the head hanging down. You can see a little bit of the thorns there in the hair. And this is, in fact, a Saint Sebastian. But I hope that you will remember this when Tom shows you the original plan, in fact, the original sculpture that Charles Umloff made for Mrs. Marion Kugler McNay. Look at the composition here and look at the way this figure of Saint Sebastian is hanging. Here we know it's Saint Sebastian because Umloff writes it in there, and he also puts the arrows in him. But if you take those arrows away, it's going to look very much like one of the Christ figures that Tom will show you in a minute. So today we are actually, in honor of Good Friday, if you make a donation, all donations go to the Central Texas Food Bank here on our Facebook page. It would be lovely if you could support them. They are supporting all of Central Texas. So please, if you are so inclined, make a small donation to the Central Texas Food Bank. And I would now like to introduce our docent extraordinaire, Mr. Tom Hyder.
Hi, good morning everyone. Thanks for joining us. Well, I am really pleased today to talk about Charles Umloff's Crucifixion. What a marvelous sculpture we have here in the garden. And it's very unusual in terms of Charles' work and basically sculptures in general, because this, as you'll note right away, is not bronze. This is aluminum. And sculptors don't work in aluminum too often, and the people who work at the foundry, the men and women who cast these sculptures, they almost never work in aluminum, and I gotta tell you, they hate working in aluminum because the people at the foundry work with bronze day in, day out. They know all the properties of bronze. They know how long it takes to cool. They know everything that bronze is going to do. You throw a different metal in there with different temperatures, it messes up the whole works. But, you might be saying, but then why in the world did Charles create this sculpture out of aluminum? Because the person who commissioned the work, Marion Kugler McNay, requested that this sculpture be in aluminum. Now you might be thinking, Marion Kugler McNay, where have I heard that name? She is the person in San Antonio who donated the McNay Art Museum, a beautiful museum if you've never been to it, down in San Antonio. Marion Kugler McNay and Charles Umloff were actually fellow students at the Chicago Art Institute, where Charles did most of his art instruction as a young man. They continued their friendship over the years, and many years later, when Marion was living in San Antonio, she commissioned Charles to create the Crucifixion that we have here in the garden. Now, the final version, this is basically an artist's version. This is a scale model. It's not the final piece. The final piece is actually much larger. It's about 3 times this size. And Marian commissioned it for the cemetery where she had chosen her burial plot in San Antonio. So she wasn't going to put the crucifixion necessarily at her plot, but she wanted it for the cemetery. That cemetery happened to be adjacent to a convent, so it was primarily the graveyard for the nuns who had lived and worked in that convent. Now, there's an interesting little story I have to tell you about this particular sculpture. Ordinarily, when an artist like Charles would receive a commission, first they would do a sketch, as you were seeing some sketches that Katie was showing just a minute ago. He'll do sketches and show them to the party who's asked for the commission to be sure there's a clear meeting of the minds. Then the artist will create a clay model so that he and the person with the commission can see it in 3 dimensions and then make any last minute changes that they maybe don't agree with how the clay model came out. Well, in the case of the crucifixion, when Charles created the clay model, Marian looked at it and she said, "Oh my goodness, Charles, that is spectacular. However, I can't use it. It was so graphic." Marian said, "If we put that in a cemetery, it's going to scare the bejabbers out of the nuns." So Charles went back into the studio, reworked it, and created the crucifixion we see here. Now here is the crucifixion that Marian rejected. Years afterwards, Charles took the clay model and cast it in bronze, and today it's in the Umloff family garden. And you can see how graphic that is compared to the final piece. Now there's a few interesting things here in the final piece that we basically have to interpret. Charles didn't leave us notes as to how he wanted us to interpret it. Artists typically want the individual looking at their work to interpret it. So the first thing you'll note is Christ is still alive. His head is up. That's rather unusual when we think of all the crucifixion scenes we see in churches and in museums. Most of the time, the crucifixion depicts Christ moments after he has died, and his head will be drooped down. But here, he's still alive, and he's looking, we interpret, looking up to heaven, but notice he's looking a little bit off to the right. And as we read in the Bible, God the Father is on the right-hand side. So it's quite possible this is when Christ is dying on the cross and he's looking up into heaven. But furthermore, we also look at his right hand there with the finger pointing. What might he be pointing to? It's possible, again, going back to the Bible, that he is actually pointing at the good thief. If we recall from the Bible, there is a good thief on Christ's right hand and the bad thief on his left. The reason one is called the good thief and one is called the bad thief is the bad thief was basically joining in the crowds that were surrounding the crucifixion in mocking Christ. Whereas the good thief on Christ's right was saying, leave the guy alone, we deserve our fate, but this guy didn't do anything wrong. And then later on, as the 3 of them are hanging there in their crucifixions, the good thief says, Jesus, remember me when you get to your kingdom. And that's when Christ, and again, it looks as though he's pointing at the good thief. At that point, Christ replies to him and says, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. And so, what we gather from that is, from that Bible verse, is we only know of one person for sure who's in heaven with Christ, and that's the good thief. So, please enjoy the crucifixion. One last point I want to make about it is there was an art critic for one of the Eastern newspapers who wrote a review of this particular crucifixion, and I have to paraphrase his words a little bit, but he said, when I look at this crucifixion, he said, I can see the Christ who died for all of us. So thank you for enjoying a little time with us in the garden today.
Thank you so much, Tom, for
Thank you,
that.
Katie.
Sir, and please join one of Tom's tours, which is on the third Saturday of every month at third Saturday at noon, at 12 noon. Please join it. It's free with admission. And I wanted to reiterate that today, any donations you make today go to the Central Texas Food Bank, but that does not mean that the Umloff is lacking a fundraiser. In fact, we do have our garden party coming up on June 3rd. And so I would like to invite our Senior Development Manager, Jessica Burford, to tell you about how you might be able to get early bird garden party tickets here in springtime. Hi, Jessica. Welcome.
Hi. Y'all, it is cold and gloomy, but you know when it won't be. Thursday, June 3rd, and we are so excited to bring Garden Party back, and it's going to be outdoor. It's Austin's favorite outdoor fundraiser, and we are so excited to host it this year. We are having 2 sessions to keep people at a distance. We're going to have only about 250 people at each session, but we're having all of our restaurants with the bites. Twin Liquors is providing wine, Tito's is providing liquor, and we really hope you'll be there. We have early bird sales going on now through April 8th, and then April 9th the costs rise by $50. So please buy your tickets now through April 8th, and we hope to see you Thursday, June 3rd. Thanks. Katie, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Terrific. Thank you, everybody. Have a very peaceful Easter weekend, and please come to the garden soon. We will be open all weekend. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.